All right. Thank you for joining us today to talk about industrial marketing. I'm Joseph Lewin from CADENAS PARTsolutions, and I'm here with Paul Hepperla. Paul, why don't you just take a second and let us know a little bit about who you are and your background?
Thanks, Joseph. My name is Paul Hepperla. I'm currently the Vice President of Strategy for the cold chain solutions at Emerson. Started my career about 28 to almost 29 years ago in various roles: sales, marketing, product strategy, product management, and now solutions and strategy, which really means business and business development, partners, mergers, acquisitions, and really trying to help us manage our portfolio of different companies in the right way. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really excited to jump into our conversation today, and we're focusing a lot in our conversation about customer research and the importance of that, and kind of your take on that. So, to dive in, is field research important for developing an industrial marketing strategy?
I think the obvious question is yes. And I think one of the key parts of that is that unless you understand the markets that you are trying to serve, and frankly, the markets that they are trying to serve, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself, your products, as well as your customers in terms of what you can do to really understand it. Because many times customers have the tendency to ask for a specification of what they need. And if you're not up to speed on what that market's looking for and of the
Mm.
market they're trying to serve, you may do exactly that without necessarily understanding what's most critical and what's most important. And as a result, you might overprice and or underprice and not necessarily express the best value you can bring forward, especially in a role of marketing. I mean, I think
Mm.
a big focus of marketing is understanding that customer.
Yeah, I mean, and you hear a lot in the marketing circles, especially today, about the importance of customer research and the value of customer research. And in the business to consumer world, that's kind of where it ends. But there's a unique wrinkle when you're in the B2B market because your customers have customers as well that they're serving.
It, exactly. And I think, research can take a number of different roles. And I think if, as a marketer, we see so much research that comes in front of us, and if we rely upon the traditional research capabilities and tools that are out there, you'll have some aspect of the industry, but you won't necessarily have the deep understanding of why those changes, why those trends, why those needs in the marketplace are evolving or changing.
Hmm.
And so it really depends upon how deep you go with that research. And I would generally recommend that the research that you can get from all those different entities and bodies is great. The more that you actually talk to a customer or to their customers' customers, the better off you're going to be. You're going to find insights that you weren't previously aware of or pressures. And so
Hmm.
as you're marketing to somebody and especially in this industrial space, if you're trying to be something different than everybody else, I think it's critical that you relate it to the value. And many times the value of a component may not be necessarily seen by the company that you're selling to, but if you can relate why that component's valuable to their customers, now there's, I think, a stronger link, a stronger relationship opportunity with those marketing efforts.
Yeah, and so I mean, if you're focusing only on your customers, you're kind of limited to the typical marketing things: price, availability. Some of those more obvious areas when it comes to marketing or product marketing. Whereas when you're focusing more on what is the solution, what problem is my product actually solving, and then what are some of the other challenges in the market that my product maybe could solve, or another product that it could connect with, or all of these other layers that go beyond your product itself and begin to affect the end user and the end consumer. And the better that you understand that, the more that you're able to sell on the value, and even educate your own customers on things they might not understand about their customer and kind of help to bridge that gap.
Exactly, and many times we find ourselves playing the role of a mediator between two parts of an organization that may not see eye to eye, or customer and their customer in terms of how that value comes around. And in Emerson, we have a lot of sensors in our business, and fine, you need a temperature sensor. There's a myriad of choices out there. But understanding the role, the responsibility, and what value that customer gets out of it can vastly change what the specifications are. And
Hmm.
so if you're talking to an engineer, it's going to be driven on what the specification and the specific needs are. I think if you start to talk to product management and then you talk to their sales team, and I've had this experience where we were working on getting our things specified with a customer, and they've been specified. When we talked to the engineer, we had one answer. When we talked to product management, we had a similar answer with some differences. And then we went and talked to sales, and sales gave us so much information around
Hmm.
what their customers are valuing, and then why either our solution is better fit or not as best fit for that. And so it was an enlightening conversation because we finally understood, oh, okay, so the way your customers are viewing this is X, Y, and Z, and that doesn't necessarily translate, and many times doesn't translate well to the engineers and procurement that are driving specification and then price. And so having that deeper understanding of how their customers perceive value, I think is just it's a critical feature, a critical capability that we have to have as marketers, because it opens up the world to creating more value. And so we can always talk about value. How much does it save you? How much does it produce revenue? That's great. But when we go talk to the customer's customers, now that we understand criticality, what happens when it fails, and failure, especially in the industrial side of things, is with components and parts, becomes a big part of it. And while our customers might see warranty claims as one aspect of that, that falls back. When you talk to the customer, you understand the criticality of that and what happens in a failure and how much it costs them. And so now, if one of your features is that you're more reliable, well, how does that translate? And is it an hour of downtime? Is it a day of downtime? What's the financial effect? And then what's the emotional effect on that? So that's the other aspect that I would say that many times we in industrial marketing have a hard time tapping into, which is the emotional aspect of that connection. And if we have that customer's input and involvement, it's great to help create an emotional connection to, gosh, when this happens, I panic. Okay, what does
Hmm.
that, what does that mean? And I think it's really hard, especially I'm an engineer by degree. Talking engineer to engineer, and you start talking about the emotional aspects of it, everyone kind of steps back and
Right.
perhaps recoils a little bit. But I think it's a critical thing that we understand the technical needs, what happens in the value, but also that emotional response to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and something that's interesting along those lines is that, I my job has primarily been for the last few years marketing to engineers, and engineers think that they make all of their decisions logically, but in the end of the day, I would say that they're more logical buyers than your typical buyer is, but there's still a lot of emotion that's involved, and a lot of even politics that's involved in these decisions, and different things that I think they wouldn't necessarily want to admit is the truth. It might not even realize is the truth, but there's still the underlying emotion. For instance, I found that engineers do a lot of research to come to a conclusion the first time they go around. But then when it comes to recognizing that things have changed, they can tend to entrench in the way that they've been doing things for a long time, because they did do the research
Correct.
before and they did make a logical decision. But then to convince them that that's not the best decision anymore, even though it might have been 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or I mean, even like 20 or 25 years ago, there's still people who are doing drawings on paper when there's other tools that are it depends on the circumstance, but there's other tools that are readily available that are better, but they have always done it that way, and they don't want to change. So being able to get to that underlying emotion is vital if you're going to get an engineer to especially make a change from one vendor to another. And if you're trying to get them to make that change, logic only might not be enough. You're going to have to move them enough, get to enough pain to make the to make there be enough awareness for them to actually change.
And it's a question around risk. As an engineer, we like to be right, and we like to prove that we're right. So we're binary in that respect. And I would say early on in our careers, many times we are more willing to take risks, and then we find something that works, and our willingness to deviate from that becomes less and less. And
Mm.
many times, what that results in, and I will throw this at myself as well, but it's cut and paste engineering. It worked before, so I'm going to just insert it into what we need to do now because it should work as we move forward. And so risk becomes a big part of that, because if you're asking for a change, I think one of the key questions to ask the buyer and who your customer is what's the risk and what does change look like? And I think it's an under asked and less understood aspect of what we do, which is what is the change management process? Because if you're working with a company where change is easily adopted, great. Then we know that the risk is less and change management's more easily accommodated.
Yeah.
But if change management means that you're moving not just your part of the organization, but 15 other parts, and it's going to take a year to get that forward, as we market that, we have to understand then, how do we help them understand that this change, one, we can help you accommodate it more easily, and two, we can lower the risk.
Yeah.
And so I think from the direct customers basis, that's what matters. As you talk to their customers, I think you're going to see a completely different risk profile. And I frankly think we're in the position to help educate the folks that we're selling to about what their customers might be feeling.
Yeah.
So now if we can tie those two things of risk together, I think that's the key.
Yeah, and that really leads us in the next part of the conversation. But I do just want to say you're one of the few people who I've heard talk about as a marketer talk about risk. I think when you get further up into other areas of the business, other business executives or people on the more business oriented side think about risk a lot. And that plays, especially when you're talking about legal or finance or compliance. That's their whole job. But as marketers, I think it's not talked about as much. But you have two types of risk that is being weighed in a situation where you're making a change. You have the business risk. So, what's the risk to the business of bringing in this new thing? But I think an even bigger one than that is what is the personal risk to the person
Correct.
who's bringing that change in. And if that risk is greater than the potential reward, even if it's going to be a huge benefit to the company, most people are not going to do that. And engineers or people that are very analytical are going to be even more resistant to taking something that's going to be a potential huge risk. They're not huge risk takers in general. And
Right.
Engineers actually are one of the top groups in the country to become millionaires because they consistently invest, as a group, consistently invest in like stable investments that are going to stay steady over time versus like taking the big risk, big reward ideas. And that still plays in this area. So if you're going to market to engineers and get them to make a change, you have to take a consideration of their personal risk they're going to take and mitigate that. And that might be changing the way that you market the product or how you onboard something new, or having a strategy for change management and that being really clear ahead of time so that they understand that process and they're comfortable with it. I think those are all really important things to be thinking through when marketing in this space.
And I think it's also equally important to understand the risk of not making the change. And that's a sales tactic. But so what's the risk of making the change? Well, what's the risk of not making that change? If you can help them make that technical argument or a financial argument, at least now you're transparent about this is a change. We can help you mitigate that risk. But by failing to do that, you're now going to be consistently behind the competition. You're not going to be addressing a market need that is fully aware that you've talked about in your specification and talked about in your request for doing things. So I think there is the risk, and then there's the risk of not doing it and not making that change. And I think engineers typically will understand the risk very well, but many times they fail to fully comprehend the risk of not making it. And so that's where I think there is a great opportunity to talk about value and what we do to help manage that change. And people talk about digital transformation, change, all the other aspects, and it's great. But when you have a product that works, why change it? And that's a engineering mindset. And I think you've got to be able to answer that question as a marketer. If it's working, why change? Here's the reasons why, and here's how we're going to help you make it easy so you can make that change.
Yeah, and that risk might be on the horizon in 5 years, but if you don't start working towards that now, you're going to be, maybe even completely obsolete if you haven't been working towards that. Like having on the software side, not having cloud solutions and not working towards that. At this point, you're behind the 8 ball, but in 5 years, you might not exist if you only have on-premise solutions for a lot of the software and things like that. But
Kodak, I mean, and even to look at Kodak, right? They had the opportunity to move into the digital camera space and chose not to because they viewed it as, well, what happens to our existing business? And I think as marketers, we've got to be constantly asking, what's going to happen to our existing business? And you can
Yeah.
look at that in a 1 year horizon, a 5 year horizon, and a 10-year horizon. And 1 to 5 years might be perfectly fine, but 10 years out, it may not be. And as an
Yeah.
engineer, we're not designing for a 1 year time frame. So we've got to be able to look at that view, that wider view. And many times that's difficult because engineers tend to be more tactical than
Yeah.
strategic. And so looking at that longer time horizon, it might help you create the story of why this change on even a small component, certainly with everything that we see with supply chain and constraints but end of life orphanage, technology orphanage, which means it's fine for right now and it's fine for the next 2 years. And after 2 years, now we're dealing with the support of that.
Mm.
And depending upon if you're on the specifying aspect or the operation and execution side of that, dealing with that support issue can be a major headache.
Yeah, that's excellent. I want to keep talking on this subject, but we got a little bit more ground to cover.
No worries.
uh, yeah, so I think something that's unique about talking to you in this space, and talking to a former colleague of yours also, is we kind of touched on it, but talking to your customers is important. Doing customer research, and I think most people are going to acknowledge that, whether they're good at it or not. But you're taking it a step further by saying, well, it's not just your customer, but understanding your customer's customer, maybe even better than they do, and certain within the realm that you work with them. And so, what role does your customers play in the research process?
For me, it is probably the most important part of it.
Hmm.
So we will sell to an OEM. And just as an example, you're selling to an original equipment manufacturer that's providing a piece of equipment in a kitchen in a restaurant. So we can deliver the specification to them and design what they needed to design. But when you go out and talk to their customers, you understand how they use it. And it could be small changes to layout and placement. If I had a hanger here to hang a spatula on, boy, that would be so nice.
Hmm.
There's so many little nuances that you get when you talk to the chef or the cook that is maybe buying that piece of equipment that influence the technical and engineering design of what you're providing. And so, even though you meet the specifications, form, function, placement, all those other things,
Right.
it's really hard to understand why a customer is asking for that in the specification. One of the ways to bridge that is you can go and ask them why. And my view is many times the engineer will have a very technical reason why, but not necessarily a practical reason why.
Hmm.
And if you go talk to your customers, now it lights up. Oh, that's why they're asking for that here.
Yeah.
And it will either confirm that the design and the specification of why they're asking is good, but now you have more information to go from. And so I think the more time that you can understand who your customer's consumer is and then how they use it,
Yeah.
the better off you can provide valuable information back to your customer. And in some instances, they may not know or they've heard it tangentially. And when you bring it as a supplier, a vendor, a partner, whatever realm you're in, and you bring it to the customer, one is I think it builds confidence because now they know that you understand the space, some of the pressure, and some
Yeah.
of those risks that they're dealing with. And so I think you become a better partner in that realm, and it may help you in terms of not being commoditized. So in this industrial space, there's a lot of commodity,
Hmm.
and that's how people view it. So what's your ability to extract that?
Yeah. And if you're only focusing on the job that the specifier is specing you in for, and that's it, and you don't go beyond that, like you're saying, what value do you bring beyond your competitor who's priced 10% cheaper or 2% cheaper, And so
Right.
if if the person who's specifying can't quickly and easily understand, not from a ultra technical, we could go features and benefits and go ultra technical, but I think another thing that's easy to assume in this space is that engineers know more than they do outside of their specialty. And so, if you're specializing in compressors, the engineer who's specifying in that's designing a refrigerator, they're not going to necessarily be an expert in compressors, certainly not as much as the engineering team that designs compressors. and they're not
Right.
necessarily going to understand the full ramifications of some highly technical change. And it might make your product 10 times better than the competition. But if the engineer specifying it doesn't understand that, then it's a commodity. It's still commodity to them, or they're going to compare it, do their best to compare that apples to oranges, or sorry, apples to apples compared to something else, even if there is a huge change or a huge difference between the two. So then, if you're only focusing on the immediate specs, um, you're a race to the bottom on price or availability or these other more standard things. Whereas what you're talking about is, how do you go beyond that? How do you get out of that conversation completely and force, in I mean in a positive way, it actually is for their
Right.
benefit, but force the person specifying to think beyond, to compare apples to oranges. Like, you want them to have to not really be able to compare you directly to somebody else. And knowing more about their customers than they do in a specific area is one way to start selling on value and adding extra things maybe to your product that solve a problem for their customer that makes you stand out big time. So they can't just put you in the commodity category.
Correct. And one of the big roles of marketing is to educate. And it's okay, because if you're going to go ask an engineer the whys, all right, I see your specification, what's most important? Why? You get down to 3 layers of why, they may not know the answer. And so we don't like to know, we don't like to be in a position where we don't know the answer. So if they get to that point, which I think reasonably many people will get to, but you can say, well, here's what we've found from listening to your customers. You're giving them the answer even though you've asked the question. And I think it creates more credibility, and it eases, again, some of that risk of what we previously talked about. And there's the product, there's the application, and then there's the use of that application by the customer, by their customer's customer. So many times we focus on the product and the application without understanding the use by their customer, whoever they're selling to.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So then the challenge still remains. I mean, I think for a lot of marketing people, it's hard enough to get in front of customers, and depending on the size of your organization and hierarchical structure and all kinds of relationship between sales and marketing, sometimes it could be hard to even get in front of customers to do research. But then when you're going to your customers, that's an extra layer. So how do you get in front of your customers, and what have you done to succeed in having those conversations in the past?
Yeah, I think there's an area of treading lightly. In other words, if you're going to go ask your customer, hey, I want to go talk to your customer, there might be some reticence to doing that. And the question that we always ask is, well, what value are you bringing to them if you're going to go speak with them? But there are so many other research sources out there. One is just social media. Go look at LinkedIn. Go look at Twitter, and understand who their customers are. Do some market mapping that says, I'm selling to XYZ company, and their top 5 customers are these customers. Go find out what they're selling to them and what their customers are interested in. You don't need to be actively engaged with that customer to understand what their customers are dealing with. And then I would say continue to look at secondary and third and fourth level research and find the way to stitch it back. And so I tend to be one that looks at a very broad range of research. And I'll look at industries that might be similar but are not the industries that I serve. And I'm doing that because I'm trying to understand what trends are shifting, what's changing, and then what might be the impact back to my customer. So I think one is use the tools that are available to all of us for free and understand what their customers are doing. We sell through lots of different channels. We'll sell to a distribution channel. We'll sell to the OEM. What the OEM's dealing with in their own financial situation, how they gain value, how they reduce cost is critical. But why are they trying to reduce costs? Is it because their market is putting price pressure on them? We'll find out what that price pressure is, because then you have a pretty good idea of what their cost reductions are going to try to be. If the pricing in the marketplace is got downward pressure on those suppliers of 10%, don't be surprised when they come to you for 10%. Likewise, if you're in a high growth area with where their customers are growing quickly, now it's not so much about costs, it's about speed of delivery and then the longer term aspects of those. So I think the more you understand about your customers in that marketplace and what those trends are, what those pressure points are, what risks they might be under, now you know how to target it towards that. And even though the
Yeah.
engineer necessarily may not understand it, you can say, listen, one of the things we're seeing about this market is an incredibly high speed of growth. I'm sure you're under pressure on delivery. And he's going to say, he or she might say, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I'd have to deal with every day. It's such a pain in the butt. That's why I'm here late. You just got your emotional connection. If you
Hmm.
can get that emotional connection, now you can talk about how you leverage that and how you can benefit the customer by managing to it.
Yeah. I mean, and this even plays into product marketing and being able to define the products to begin with, potentially, and
Correct.
working with your product development team to create a new product that fits something in the market that's happening. So if price really is that important, but you recognize that the average, refrigerator is only there for 5 years, then maybe you cut some of the extra things that you've put in that are more expensive that are going to make that compressor last 25 years. Well, it doesn't need to last that long, and that's only for certain applications that they would ever want that. So if you're in a competitive market, you might need to trim it down and have a product that's not as reliable and not going to last as long and is cheaper, and you're able to have more available. Or on the flip side, if you recognize that this product is going to be there 25 years and all of your competitors are selling a cheaper solution, then it takes education with your customer to help them understand why they need to include that and how it's actually to their benefit, even though it's more expensive to not cut this particular
Right.
cost, and look for ways to cut costs somewhere else.
And that's, it's one of the questions that I've asked our engineers, and the response was very interesting. Asking engineering product management, where we typically will design something for a 20 to 25 year life, but our customers are typically only using that for a 7 year period. If we're getting price pressure, is it worth us visiting how we design towards a 10 year life?
Hmm.
And when you think about what engineers design for, reliability, uh, uh, best price for the use, all these other things, we always want to design it to last forever. That's the nature of what we do.
Right.
But if our customers are designing and working on their equipment, that they know that life of that piece of equipment is 8 years, okay, what value are we providing if we've designed it to last for 30 years? We've
Yeah.
added a bunch of costs. Yes, the reliability is there, but is it worth revisiting? And I'm not saying
Mhm.
it's right or wrong, but the question becomes, is it worth revisiting? And so if we don't know what our markets are doing and what our customers' markets are doing, we'll have none of that insight. And so that's where I think it's really critical to really understand your customers. You can do focus groups, you can do the standard research processes, you can leverage the execution research, GLG, and all the rest of those to start to ask questions of those customers if you really want to go down that path. But I think there's just so much available information for free that can be leveraged, and look into those first, because I like the anecdotal stories.
Yeah.
When you're talking to a customer, you're reading something about how they have to stay awake till 2 a.m. in the morning because they're worried about a fire. Boy, that's something to leverage. And
Yeah.
and then it comes back internally to say, are we designed to help him with that? Because then our customer, might be providing that piece of equipment, can understand, gosh, if we put a red bell on there, or a notification, or we create some sort of other component that lets somebody know that risk is there, that becomes value add to them.
Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting point there too, having the humility to go talk to people who maybe you wouldn't normally go talk to, and go live in their shoes for a couple days, and getting a good idea of what they're going through. And if you're not willing to understand the reality of your customers, really, in the end of the day, the people who pay the bills, because they're paying they're paying the people that are paying you, and that isn't, I think it's easy to think of that as being the executives at these companies, or high level people, and those are the people that typically get all the attention, but they're not the ones who are typically dealing with the pain points and problems that are solved by these products. And if you can say, man, well, I really want to serve the person who's working in the kitchen, and that's really what our product does ultimately, and you make your job to serve them as well as possible by providing something that's meaningful to your customers so they can make the job easier of the people they're working with, then there's real value in that. And I think it also makes it more meaningful what you're doing, in the end of the day when you are serving people. So we covered quite a bit of ground here, and I did have one more question, but I think we pretty much covered it about how does the research affect your marketing strategies and whatnot. I don't know if there's anything else on that topic you wanted to talk about, but kind of felt like we sort of covered
just
that.
a couple things. One is read all sorts of information, even if it's not directly related to your industry. Read it and see if there's a trend or a change or something else that might affect yours. And people will talk about the Uberization of the economy, and there's usually, okay, I get it. Yeah, I can get it on an app on my phone and get it. But what does that mean long term, and what shifts and changes are happening there? And then, do I see that as a possibility in my market? And just looking at that broader umbrella, I think is just really, really critical. And then I would encourage the engineers in our world to not be afraid to go have a conversation, and find a way to have that conversation, even if if your customer's a restaurant. Go talk to your favorite restaurant and say, can I just understand what's behind in the kitchen? Because I sell things to all the different manufacturers here, and I just want to see what's important. Go talk to the chef. You'll be amazed. People will be happy to share that information.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, you've got more insights there. So don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to call up somebody that might not be one of your direct customers to understand. Listen, I just want to understand, what do you view when you're buying something in the market? What's valuable to you? What's not valuable to you? Reach out. I mean, that's the great thing about networks. It's a great thing about LinkedIn is there's so much information to gather. So I would strongly encourage folks to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, and on that note, if you make it about the other person and you're just genuinely curious, people are willing to share so much information. Like if you come in and you're saying, we're awesome, what we do is great, and you should listen to everything I have to say, and you kind of position it that way, well, yeah, most people aren't going to want to talk to you. But if you even go to a conference that your customers go to, and then that's another great way to do it. And you go start talking, just walking around and talking to people, and you go, oh, this is a beautiful location. Can you believe we're in San Diego right now? This is awesome. Start the conversation that way, have some small talk, and then you go, oh, you work at McDonald's. That's amazing. What do you do there? And then you get the conversation going, and you go, oh, well, man, I'm in marketing and I don't really know that much about your space. Can you just tell me a little bit about what it's like to be the manager in a kitchen? And if you open the conversation up that way, that person will talk to you for an hour.
Hours. Yeah, exactly.
You're going to have to have a colleague come pull you out of there if you're going to even get away from a conversation like that. And those are the conversations, I think, for me personally, when I've been doing research for marketing, those have been the best. The best conversations I've had are like that. And I've been amazed at how much people are willing to share and be open. But yeah, well,
absolutely.
Paul, thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, that's one of the shows I love to go to is CES. It's not really related to what I do at all, but consumer electronics it's helping me understand what people are personally buying and investing in, and the changes that they want. I try to bring that information back and say, what does it do now to my business and how might it impact it? So it's just one of those examples of a show that is outside of the realm of what we do, but I think it has strong correlation to what we might deal with in our markets in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's great. And it kind of takes I think a lot of marketers are in B2B world, especially, are familiar with trade shows, but the trade show is typically, we have a booth and then people come and talk to us.
You become You become the booth jockey, not walking around trying to understand what the market's doing.
And then you spend all of your time explaining what you do and trying to connect that. And it's like this almost like wrestling match to try to get people to understand what you do. Whereas if you leave the booth and you just go have conversations with people and you're there purely to learn, not to try to collect leads or do something like that, it's amazing. And that's to me where I see the real value for marketers at events is doing that. But
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you so much
connect with the other marketers that are there. Go talk to them, because now you have something to talk about in common. Go talk to them.
Yeah, no, I love it. I wish we could keep talking all day, but
Yeah, no
this is
worries.
fun stuff. I love this stuff. I could literally talk about this for another hour with you, but thank you so much for joining me today to talk about industrial marketing and how can people find a little bit more about you or connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Paul Hepperla, so Hepperla. And then my email is paul@hepperla.com or paul.hepperla@emerson.com. Happy to talk with anybody and answer questions that you might have as it pertains to marketing, the segments that I'm focused on, or Emerson. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again. It's been fun.
Thank you.